In this video, I'm going to make a project with a technique often referred to as the Vortex bowl pattern, or also called the dizzy bowl pattern. And I'm going to be using the Accu-Slice system to prepare all the segments to produce this project. I begin by making these laminated strips, which I showed in a previous video. These were made by cutting various woods of different thicknesses on the Accu-Slice system, gluing them back together to make these laminated wood strips. And in the past, I used these strips to produce my feature rings for some of the bowls and eggs that I've made. In this case, I'm taking two of my strips. I'm putting a center strip, usually of a darker wood, like something like catalogs of a dark wood, gluing them together. Then I'm going to take this strip after it's glued together, cut it in half, rotate it 180 degrees, put another dark strip in the middle, and I end up with a board that looks like this. So there's a mirror image on both sides of the board. In this case, there's 63 layers of wood in this project, each board between 0.20 of an inch thick and 1/8 of an inch thick. And then what I do, I've already started on one of these, I'll cut out my rings, cut out the center so I have another layer of wood. Then I'll put this on my Accu-Slice system, cut the layers 0.100 inches thick, rotate them, glue them back together, and then complete my project. The bowl that I will be producing for this project will be about 4 inches in diameter by 5 inches tall. It will contain 35 layers of laminated boards, each composed of 63 layers of various woods. The glued up boards are then cut on the jigsaw. 4 rings with an outside diameter of 4 inches are cut from the board. So next I'll drill a 1/16 inch hole right on this inner line and then cut out the centerpiece. To obtain the optimum use of the wood, an inner disc is cut from each of the 3 discs. 2 of these discs with an outside diameter of 2.5 inches and 2 inches are then used for this project. The third disc is only 1.5 inches in diameter and is too small to use for this project. To prepare the disc for the next step, the discs are sanded round on the edge sander. A disc sander could also be used to sand these discs round. Double-sided tape is applied to each of the discs, and they are attached to the fence on the Accu-Slice system. Clamps are used to apply some additional pressure to better set the tape surfaces. Only momentary pressure via the clamps is needed in order to set the glued tape surfaces. So I'm going to be cutting 3 discs at the same time. So once again, I just push my first board up against the blade. It just touches. Lock it in place. I advance this 1 full turn for the curve of the blade and another full turn 50 thousandths to cut off the first layer of wood. So I'm going to cut off my first slice of wood just to get the boards all straight and square, and then I'll keep advancing the blade 1 full turn for the curve of the blade, which will be 50 thousandths, and another 2 full turns, which will be 100 thousandths. So each of my segments, each of my layers will be 100 thousandths of an inch thick. This completes the cutting of the 3 4-inch diameter disc. Each disc produced 7 layers, each layer 0.100 inch thick, for a total of 21 layers. This is all my disc ready to glue up. And I kept all these just the same 4 inches OD, even though the IDs change. And that's so I can use this glue up jig that I put together, so I can keep these all straight as I'm going up in my glue up process. So I'll begin with the top, which is the largest ID, and I'll start gluing these up. I'm using Type-On 2 glue to glue each of the layers. To align each of the layers, I rotate each of the subsequent layers by the same amount. I'm using one of the catalog's layers as a marker guide and rotate it to the opposite edge of the adjacent layer. After gluing 2 of the layers, I clamp the glued layers using spring clamps. So I'll let that sit like a minute or 2 between clamps, just enough for the glue to set. I continue the process until all the 4-inch diameter discs have been glued up together. I then repeat the process for the remaining smaller discs. Now all the layers are glued up. This is 21 layers. And I have 2 7-layer smaller pieces. And I'll probably put a solid piece on the bottom, so it'll probably look like this. I'm going to do the final glue up on the lathe. I will be doing all my glue up and turning using a faceplate on the lathe. I've already glued the base disc to the faceplate block. This base disc is 3/8 inch thick and is composed of a 12-segment walnut ring with no center hole. I have mounted the smallest laminated disc assembly into a chuck that has been mounted into a rotating tailstock adapter on the lathe. Once again, alignment of the layers is critical. I use one of the catalog's layers as a guide and rotated the disc the same distance as was done previously. For this third disc assembly, I installed a larger chuck to accommodate this 4-inch diameter disc assembly. The discs were once again aligned and glued together. To add some additional detail to the rim of the bowl, I added 2 segmented rings. The first ring was a 0.100 inch thick catalog's ring, and the final ring was a 3/8 inch thick maple ring. Each ring contained 24 segments per ring. Both the inside and outside of the bowl was then turned on the lathe using a round carbide cutter. After turning, the bowl was sanded, starting with 220 grit sandpaper and then going down to 400 grit. To finish off the bottom of the bowl, the face plate was transferred to the rotating tailstock and the rim of the bowl was attached to a cold jaw chuck. The bottom of the bowl was cut off and then the base of the bowl was finished. After a couple coats of shellac, this is my first finished Dizzy bowl, or Vortex pattern bowl. Came out fairly nice. And here's the inside.